I work for Teal Jones and I do engineering work. We do roads and cut block designs. There was Walter Van Hel, Tom Weston and myself. We were out in the field that day. I was in the lead. I was the head of the guys. I was hanging faulting line and stuff. They were following in behind doing some traversing. And on my way down the hill, I found a big chunk of aluminum. And right away I knew it was aircraft aluminum. I'd been to a crash site before, and being out in the middle of nowhere, there's no way it could get here. So I basically knew automatically there was a plane.
Jeez, that's
We've
old.
all been to Bolduc and seen the stuff there, what it looks like.
Yeah,
And
that's old.
this has got to be old. We'll have to pan out a little bit here, maybe.
Sure, yeah.
And see what we can come up with, because there's got to be more.
I guess we probably shouldn't really disturb anything until we'll see if we can find anything else.
Yeah.
We started finding bits of aircraft debris, kind of on a trajectory through into the forest. So we followed that along. You know, as we found more and more pieces of debris, and of course they're getting bigger and bigger, we knew that there was something significant in front of us.
Some big pieces down here, guys.
Oh yeah, what do you got there?
I don't know. I don't know if this is leather or rubber. Oh, it's rubber.
Some sort of membrane, maybe.
I think so.
Yeah,
I don't know. I think I got this is part of a wing right here, I'd say. What do you think, Walt?
Oh yeah, it looks like the aileron.
Aileron?
Yeah.
Okay. Got all kinds of wires and pulleys here.
Oh yeah, definitely. Part of
this.
the aileron. So I guess the wings probably broke off on one of these trees. Boy.
Yeah. That big cedar up there snapped off probably. And we worked our way up. We found the cockpit of the plane. One of the engines was there still attached to it. And we found numerous personal items. We found like shoes, pieces of jackets, one of the old flight helmets there, leather flight helmets. We found one of them, and we were pretty sure that nobody had been here before. Everything was undisturbed. Most of the plane was buried in litter, but most of the stuff you could still tell what it was.
We didn't disturb the pieces beyond much trying to find any identifying numbers because we knew we'd have to report this when we got back to the office, and there was a good chance that there was remains there. You know, I know all the hairs on my body were standing on end when you're on hallowed ground basically, and Again, we found various identifiable parts, you know, a radio, the engines, etc.
If we find any serial numbers or anything of interest, I'll write it down.
Oh, okay. Oh, wow, look at that big tube in there.
Yep.
What's the number there, Tom? What's it say there?
I know at one point in time I saw a tube kind of sticking out of the ground, and what is this? And I grab it. No, it was loose. I pick it up and I upended it, and there's the stabilizing fins of a bomb, and I was, whoa. Yeah, that was a bit of a shocker.
The guys came in as the day after they found the plane. It's the next morning, and at that point in time, Tom figured from what he could see, this plane was an Anson, an Avro Anson. So we didn't have much information, but they did have the serial numbers from the radio that they found out there. So I put that into Google, and Googled it, and came up with a website that, even though it was an old radio, it was still being used in Anson. So that kind of confirmed a bit that it was an Anson. So.
Right there's the timber edge, and it's about 300 meters in. Yeah, we'll ribbon it in, and we'll meet the RCMP there, and let it.
The research continued. It was Dennis Cronin's wife Lorraine who found the first link to what would prove to be Anson L7056.
I heard about it in November and was sort of asked to, look into it. But I've got a lot of these calls, so I sort of didn't, I paid attention because it was a little bit unusual, but I couldn't really do anything until it had been verified. So I went back to the loggers and said, well, can you tell me what the aircraft actually is? I think it's this one, but I'm not going to fly all the way out there and hike up a mountain unless I have a good idea we're going to find something. So they actually hiked all the way out here, and I think Tom Burge hiked all the way out here. He was like 90 something, and he actually came out here, and they got the plate off the engine, which tells us, yes, this is the engine, this is the aircraft we're looking for, and it does have 4 missing persons on board.
The serial number on the engine's data plate matched official records, proving that Anson L7056 had been found.
You want to make sure you really know what you're dealing with, and you have a case of missing persons who could be on board. And then you want to learn as much about the aircraft as possible. And we came up pretty quick, but some of these, you have to be quick. When you do find out about the sites and there are remains, you want to get up here and get moving, because you always want to make sure, if people become interested in the site and they go and they sort of, they move things around, you could potentially cause a situation where you wouldn't be able to recover a certain individual.
The Department of National Defence and BC Coroner's Office quickly secured the site, but winter conditions made access roads and the crash site extremely treacherous. The decision was made to wait until spring to start the recovery. The Anson was based at RCAF Station Patricia Bay, one of 6 wartime land and sea air stations on Vancouver Island. Land clearing for the new base began before the outbreak of war. The first aircraft arrived in May 1940. The base was home to many types of aircraft, including seaplanes, fighters, bombers, and trainers. Their role was to protect Canada's Pacific coast and to train airmen under the British Commonwealth Air Training Plan. Number 32 Operational Training Unit was tasked to train airmen from Britain, Australia, and New Zealand for reconnaissance and torpedo bombing operations. Pat Bay's location and marine environment were ideally suited for this role, but mountainous terrain and unruly weather would soon take their toll. Personnel from Number 32 Operational Training Unit arrived from Britain in August 1941.
We got on the ship and it headed west. This was a troop ship, and with the escort of 2 destroyers. And then we realized we weren't going down south, we were heading west. Off Iceland, the 2 destroyers left us, and we had no idea where we were going. So we read the daily routine orders one day, and we found out that we were going to a place named Patricia Bay, BC. And no one had the faintest idea where Patricia Bay, BC, but as it happened, there was a Canadian soldier. He'd been wounded and he was going back home. And when he heard that we were going to Pat Bay, he thought we were the luckiest people alive.
Pat Bay would serve as the base for 5 bomber squadrons, 5 fighter squadrons, 3 operational training units, and 1 composite squadron. Up to 3,500 students were trained at a time. 10,000 new airmen eventually passed through the station. Among support staff were personnel who manned a fleet of frequently used crash boats.
We were shown where we were going to work, and I was fortunate enough to be working on Avro Anson's. I was an airframe mechanic, and so what we had to do was to make sure that everything, the engines and the instruments, were looked after by the airframe mechanics. The planes would take off at 9 o'clock in the morning. The planes came back, and we had to service them to make sure everything was working properly.
Well, I would be probably 7 or 8 years of age, and we would drive out to the airport to watch the planes fly. We were hoping that we'd always see the fighters taking off, and they would do low-level bombing coming down the Shelbourne Valley at treetop level, and then skimming the water and strafing and bombing the target. And they flew right over our farm, right over our school, and they disrupted life dramatically. The Avro Anson was very much part of our life at that time, and it flew around constantly.
L7056 was a British-built Anson Mark I. The type was known affectionately by aircrew as Faithful Annie.
It was quite revolutionary in some ways. It was a low-wing monoplane. It was tubular steel fuselage construction with wooden formers covered in fabric and a one-piece wing. Around this period, the Air Ministry were looking for a coastal reconnaissance aeroplane, and the Avro 652 design very, very closely equated to that. So it was very easy to adapt the 652 to the Air Ministry requirements. Ansons then became second-line aircraft. They're basically in a training role. They were over 1,500 were shipped to Canada, and I believe over 1,000 to Australia as part of the British Commonwealth Air Training Plan. They were used for pilot training, navigational training, and gunnery training, and they really were the mainstay of the British Commonwealth Air Training Plan during the war years.
This was once among the busiest airports in North America. In its heyday, Edmonton's Blatchford Field was known as Canada's aviation gateway to the north. During the Second World War, the airfield was home to units training Commonwealth airmen. It was also the headquarters of Aircraft Repair Limited, a company dedicated to preparing British aircraft for operations in Canada. Anson L7056 was one of them. The Alberta Aviation Museum proudly displays a restored Anson as a reminder of the type's important wartime role.
We had a crew of about 10 guys and about 6 girls. The original Mark I Anson had pretty much greenhouse windows right around. When they came here, they had been modified with smaller windows and more solid walls, so there wasn't the greenhouse appearance now. Yeah, I couldn't believe that a 16-year-old could be that thrilled with a big airplane. Anson was a big airplane to me.
More than 130,000 navigators, wireless operator and air gunners, and pilots were trained in Canada.
Where did I learn to fly? I learned to fly at Prince Albert, Saskatchewan. For many, it was a chance to earn $1. And you've got to remember, we're talking about the end of a very desperate times on the prairies especially.
When I was 17 and a half in July of 1940, I volunteered to go into the Air Force because I wanted to fly.
I was talked into it by my friend. He talked me into it. I got interested in the Air Force because he couldn't wait to join up. And he was a very good pilot. He was solo in no time. And it was just a natural. I had to be trained.
We did our initial training, the 12 hours or thereabouts, in England, and then I came over to Canada to train. That was the elementary flying training. A variety of planes, Tiger Moths, and then Cornells, then Harvards.
The Anson, as far as I'm concerned, an excellent training aircraft. An excellent aircraft anyway. When I had my final test, so I went up with this instructor, and he put me into this very awkward position with the hood on, and in a stall, and I brought the thing out of the stall like nothing, and with the hood, you know, I couldn't say anything, just by feel, and just luck, and or skill, I suppose. And he was so impressed, I got my wings.
And when I went back to England, we got back onto Tiger Moths again to learn how to map read our way around England. England being a little bit more congested than the wide open prairies. And with Banff in Scotland, there was the Coastal Command strike wing. And wherever you had to go, wherever the target was, you'd amble across the North Sea at somewhere between 35 and 50 feet, go into whatever fjord your target was at that particular time. You could have up to about 60 or 70 aircraft milling around in a fairly confined fjord, and that added to the congestion, and you'd sort of get out of there as quickly as you could after you'd pooped off your rockets and as much damage you could do to whatever shipping was there. Then you'd fly home again.
I come home, I'm in the circuit at 1,000 feet, and all of a sudden I have no control. My controls are frozen completely, and I didn't say a word to the crew. The crew were with me, just flying along and pulling, and all of a sudden it broke loose. And so I knew that the icing had slipped along the fuselage and dropped into the crack at the back of the empennage and locked it. And as soon as I was in the temperature that was melting, it popped out of there, and I never told the crew about that escapade. I was absolutely, I was very feared, very scared, because, you know, what the hell, I had no control of this damn thing. And I suppose it felt like it was forever, but I imagine it was only a minute or two that I was in the circuit without control.
When we were at 23,000 feet or something, on the bombing run, coned in searchlights, all of a sudden the starboard inner was on fire. Some pilots would have said, bailed everybody out, the airplane's on fire. We didn't. It didn't even occur to me. What it was an incendiary, 30-pound incendiary from above. It hit and missed all the gas tanks and the fuel lines and everything, this fire. It, you know, those are kind of, that would turn some people religious. Finally, the bomb aimer says, bomb's gone, but we had to take a picture. And we got out of the searchlights and came down to about 16,000 feet and went home.
Of the 15 from Hanley, Saskatchewan that went as aircrew, my brother and I are the only two that aren't buried over there. In other words, there's 13 died from that little community, all aircrew.
The last of the snow finally cleared in May 2014, allowing the recovery team to begin their work.
When I first received the task, I thought it was going to be a little bit simpler. And then when you have all the different hazards implicated in a crash, it required more coordination with different departments, with the radiological safety side and the environmental aspect. And the explosive ordnance also required a lot of coordination. And then getting to the site, you kind of feel a little bit of excitement because it's new, but you kind of feel sad because of the situation.
It's really rare to find a site that's been untouched and that hasn't been salvaged and people haven't been through it. It's extraordinary to see something like that. And yeah, very rare, very exciting. We just kind of go in with, you know, with environmental concerns, radiation concerns from the paneling. When you actually get there, you kind of deal with what you have in front of you. You know, there's always different things you have to look at for the Second World War. You have to look at, well, explosives, and the EOD found evidence of explosives. In our records, we have evidence of 20-pound bombs.
It's not believed at this time, based off of the crash, that they would have had time to ditch their ordnance. To date, we found 3 of these. The reason why we keep coming back being EOD is the manifests that we've pulled out of archives doesn't really correlate with what we're finding on the ground. The manifest said 30 pounds of ordnance. We found 3 tail fins, so that's 60 pounds. So we're plus 30 pounds. Even though we haven't found the actual warheads, we're not sure if they exploded or if they were even carrying them. But because of the discrepancies between the manifest, the color coding system, we have to be prepared for it.
Because we're with National Defence, you're not just dealing with remains, or potentially finding missing persons. That's one part of it. You also have to have a responsibility to actually take care of the site and make sure that you're not leaving anything behind that's going to cause a problem to anybody who's interested in the site later on. Basically looking for evidence of 4 individuals. So 3 airmen, 3 British and 1 Canadian. It doesn't look like an aircraft. I mean, it hit very hard, and it's been 70 years. So you're looking for evidence of, you know, artifacts, so things like watches, bracelets, things that would have been engraved. If there's any sort of remains associated with that, okay, well, that gives you a pretty good idea. Because sometimes you just, you know, we have dental charts, and we do that as well, but you always want to look for as much evidence as possible. So what we're finding is, you know, we're finding personal items, we're finding, you know, cigarette cases and things like this. And then we're also finding remains up sort of near, well, where you would expect to find them. Usually when we start an investigation, we want to, if we can, we'd like to find the family and let them know what's going on and keep them informed as much as possible, just so it doesn't come out of nowhere.
The first meeting with a family of the Anson crew took place in Drumheller, Alberta.
This woman phoned from Ottawa, but she phoned to my niece and said keep it quiet, but my niece couldn't keep it quiet, so she put it in the paper. It was kind of stunning, you know, after all these years figuring he went down in the ocean. But all I'd like to do is get closure. And that's what I'm waiting on now. I can only remember certain things. I can remember he came back one time. Then he took me downtown and he said, took me into the store and he said, you can have whatever you want. So he bought me a little pipe. He said, now you can go home and smoke it like your dad.
Project historian and author Robert Stitt had the privilege of reviewing Bill Baird's papers, including his wartime logbook. It records 2 earlier exercises in Anson L7056 before its fatal flight. Bill Baird began preparing for war in June 1942. Could he and his fellow crew members have imagined they would never reach the front lines? The arrival of a telegram was a heart-stopping moment for any wartime family.
Deeply regret to advise you, your son, Sergeant William Baird, previously reported missing, is for official purposes permitted to have died October 13th, 1942. Please accept my profound sympathy. My father was digging a sewer line into our house for the first time, and the man from the station came and delivered it to him out in where he was digging. He didn't say anything for quite a while, and then finally he went to the house and told my mother.
we do a little bit of research in the archives, find out who is missing. We get their personnel records. 3 were Brits, 1 was Canadian, so we contact the British authorities.
In the first instance, we write a letter to the last known address. On the record of service, it gives us the known next of kin at the time. I wrote to the 3 addresses, and for Luckock, amazingly, they still live in the same area that they lived when, sadly, Sergeant Luckock was killed.
Next door neighbours who lived in the house live in the house where I was born and which I live next door to now. Got this letter saying this is the only address we had for Robert Luckock. Did they know, or were they still there, related? And they happened to know that we lived next door and had our name. And that's how I first heard.
The other 2, I then went to my RAF Media, and they put articles in local newspapers, and we also did local radio appeals for the area where they lived at the time.
I read it in the local newspaper. I showed it to my wife and she read it out to me, and I thought, goodness me, they found Tony after all those years. And as a young boy, I was told about it, and we thought he'd been lost at sea. In a sense, I suppose we were just shocked. Emotionally, we were quite hammered, really. There's Tony as a young lad. I should imagine about 12. And there's my father in the background, obviously with Mum and Dad. We went to get the pictures out, though. We went and got them out, and I started to look at them again. And then I contacted Sue Raftree.
There's Charles George Fox there.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
So there was a connection already between 2 of the crew members.
I'm calling from the Ministry of Defence. She told me who she was, Sue Raftree. And he said, oh, I've got some news for you. She said, I hope you're sitting down. So I said, go on. So she said, well, it's rather shocking. We have found your father's remains.
Chris wants to talk to you urgently. And I thought, why would he want to talk to me urgently? Something must have happened. And rang him almost straight away. And his first words were, are you sitting down? Yes. Well, they found Dad's plane, or the remains of it. And I said, you've got to be joking. He said, no, they had the MOD on this afternoon, and they found him, and they found me via advertising in the Manchester papers. And I said, well, can't understand why they found you first, but I'm glad to hear anyhow. And as we say, the rest, I've used the words before, is history.
He was 11 years older than me. I looked up to him because he was an older brother. He looked after me, he made a fuss of me. And I admired him because he always had a girlfriend or 2. And I thought that's pretty cool. Though I didn't say cool in those days. He was very much an actor, I think. Liked to pose. Always had a pipe, always sort of languid, and either that or with a girlfriend. And yeah, he rather fancied himself. And I think my parents particularly were glad he was going to Canada because it was a nice, safe place, halfway around the world to us and nowhere near danger. I think my mother and I were probably alone in the house. And I was upstairs, and I think it must have been a telegram in those days came. And I can remember my mother, who was very undemonstrative and never cried that I can remember, absolutely screaming. And that's the memory that I really have of knowing something tragic had happened. I don't think the family ever recovered, to be honest. It certainly shattered my father, and after the First World War, coming through himself, losing his own brother soon afterwards in the flu epidemic, and then losing his oldest son, he never really recovered.
Tony's parents had died much, much earlier in the 70s. So we are the only two remaining relatives now. But Tony's always been in our hearts. We've had images of Tony, and we realise he died at such a young age. And it's fantastic news that I now know what he was doing and obviously how he met his fate.
I can understand perhaps why he would, because of the person he obviously was, from what we found out in looking at letters from the time. Obviously as a 4-year-old we didn't recognise it, and Mum was, not to put it too mildly, not happy with the situation. She would sooner he hadn't volunteered, but he felt, although he was in a preferred occupation and didn't have to be called up, he felt he had to volunteer.
She remarried, but she still spoke about him. You know, and it's just carried on through life really, right up to her death, unfortunately.
My youngest grandchildren are now 12, and they have become, they're like typical 12-year-olds. They become very interested in it and asking lots of questions about who's this man, who's that man, what did he do, why did he do it. I was happy to let things lie, for want of a better word, but this finding of the aircraft and the digging through the films, I will no doubt carry on looking a bit deeper.
They flew together, they died together, and they will be buried together. This is a normal policy that we've done, and it's always worked very well in the past, and I'm sure it will work this time as well.
L7056 was one of 5 Ansons that departed Pat Bay on a 300 nautical mile navigation exercise. The planned route took the aircraft to a turning point out over the Pacific. A front was known to be sitting offshore, but the weather was expected to improve. After radio operator William Baird confirmed on takeoff they were starting the exercise, nothing more was heard from L7056. The overland legs of the exercise were to be flown over heavily forested, mountainous terrain. Steep slopes near the Anson crash site reveal the cycle of logging and replanting.
So we're a few hundred meters now from the site, which is over to my right here, where the plane came down. And we're looking more or less to the south. And this is the direction from which the Anson approached. By all that we can determine, the weather was deteriorating. A front was coming in from ahead of me here, which is the Straits of Juan de Fuca and then up to the Pacific Ocean. The controllers at Patricia Bay tried to recall the airplanes, but our airplane 7056 was not in radio contact, and so it didn't receive the message to return to the base.
Unraveling the mystery of why the Anson crashed and what the aircraft looked like at the time becomes a passion for aviation historian Robert Stitt. He makes the long trek to the crash site many times, looking for clues among the shattered and often buried wreckage. Identifiable parts are catalogued against technical drawings, while color samples are carefully analyzed against known and potential color schemes.
The Anson, it appears, hit the treetops, started to shed pieces as it came down through the canopy. So we've already found pieces of the undersurface of the wing, a fuel tank. There are pieces of the bombs it was carrying. And what we have here is one of the 2 fuel tanks from the left wing. And interestingly, it's covered in what is a self-sealing layer, which is a number of layers of rubber, possibly unusual for a training airplane. But the purpose of this was that if a bullet went through the wing and into the fuel tank, the layers in this would close up over the opening and, as best as possible, seal up the tank so that only a very little of the fuel drained away and the aircraft could regain its base.
Each Anson crew member was issued a parachute, which was stowed next to their position. Trained riggers performed the painstaking task of packing the canopy, shroud lines, and the ripcord with its distinctive handle.
This is the pull handle for a parachute. And if we flip this over, it's very wet and heavy and soggy. And then underneath here we can see the silk from the canopy. And then inside here are the lines that ran up to the canopy from the harness worn by the person using the parachute. In this case, obviously never used. So under the engine cowling here, we can see the main wheel. Here over on this side, we can see what look like claw marks from an animal that's been perhaps sharpening its nails on the old tire here. We're back on the site for the fourth time now, and we're sitting here by the port engine. And we learn something different every time we come back by looking at all the bits and pieces. And you notice the propeller blade here is bent backwards. And typically if a propeller and an engine are generating power, when they hit something, they tend to go forward or break off because the helix of the propeller is slicing through the air, and when it hits something, it gets ripped forward. You can see this one is very much bent backwards and wrapped around the shape of the cowling. So it's possible that if this engine was not producing full power or no power at all, that loss of power was a contributory factor to the aircraft running out of height and hitting the treetops and contributing to the end of the flight.
It was so very close to remaining hidden. If the plane would have gone another 100 meters farther, you know, we were coming along a rock bluff. We just happened to catch the tail end of the debris field. So just a bit farther, and very likely that we would have had no need to go down there, and it would still remain hidden.
The BC coast is extremely difficult flying conditions, and these guys were learning, and there's a lot of missing in this area. Like Pat Bay was not an easy place to fly out of.
We were lower ranks because it was wartime. They didn't broadcast the fact that planes had landed on some mountainside somewhere, and we lost quite a few. One particular day, we looked over towards Salt Spring Island. For some reason, of course, as I say, we didn't know what happened. The plane did not get any altitude. They just seemed to go straight into Mount Tuam on Salt Spring.
More than 50 military aircraft were involved in accidents over and around Vancouver Island during the war. Some 140 Commonwealth airmen were either killed or, like the 4 airmen on board Anson L7056, declared missing. Many crashes took place in bad weather, with aircraft striking obscured peaks or ridges. Others were lost in the surrounding waters. On August 23, 1942, engine problems forced the captain of Stranraer flying boat number 951 to ditch in high seas, 75 miles from land. Some crew members were spotted from another aircraft standing on the wing, waving, as the aircraft's wireless operator signaled that they were relieved to be spotted and everything was fine. Those 8 men were never seen again. Some crews were buried at the site, their resting places lost or forgotten, until local groups made sure the airmen were remembered. This site is now the focus of an annual Remembrance Day service. The sites are often difficult to locate, but when found are treated with great respect. The peak near Nitnat Lake, where the 10 crew members of Liberator KH-108 lost their lives on November 10, 1944, just 30 feet below the summit. The remains of Liberator 11121, lost with its crew of 14, 100 feet below a ridge in the Somerset Range near Bamfield. Fabric remnants from a United States Navy blimp. It was dispatched to assist in the recovery of the 5 dead crew members of a Mitchell bomber that smashed into Mount Whymper near Lake Cowichan.
We have 28,000 missing, and I think Canadians really expect it, or they really, you know, it's a requirement. And we can do it now. We have the technology to do it. We don't necessarily go looking for them, but when we have the opportunity, when we do find them, we really have the obligation to recover them and to identify them and to give them a place for their family or their, you know, their great-grandchildren can actually go and visit.
September 2014, almost a year since Anson L7056 was found. Dennis Cronin guides William Baird's niece Sandra Overton to the crash site.
There, and this is where I came down, and I come down just a few feet over that way. What we did, I think, was a pretty good thing. We were lucky, you know. We just happened to be the ones that stumbled across it. But for a lot of other people, you know, it was a lot of closure for a lot of families.
There are many people missing from both the First and the Second World War. It was horrendous, the number of British casualties that we lost, and we are finding them quite regularly, but there are many, many that will always just be known on a memorial. That is why it's so marvellous that now we can have closure for these 4 crew members.
I feel much more connected with them, especially that Sue Raftery managed to get the service records to us, and we understand a little bit more what he was doing out in Canada and his missions that he was on out there, and it does make it seem much more real.
It was a story that was there but never had an end. But now it's looking like we are going to get some sort of end to that particular part of the story, but it can carry on.
It's been fine. It's given me closure of something that's happened that I knew had happened but didn't know where or how. And it's good to know that the site is being treated with sincerity and care, and that the burial will be properly done, and recognition of the people that gave their lives. Whether they intended to just then or not is another matter, but they were prepared.
A special gift is created. Anson L7056, as she appeared in October 1942, 71 years before being found by chance in a remote Canadian forest. New kinships form, and connections are forged through a desire to remember those that gave their lives while preparing to serve. Bob Luckock's brother David learns that the memory of a dear friend lost 7 decades ago is as fresh as ever.
I told her that the site had been discovered, and she sent this back, which I thought was very touching. In memory of Robert E. Luckock, brave, laughing Bob, never to be forgotten by his old friends from childhood onwards, including Rosemary, now aged 94. which I thought was very lovely.